Well, good morning, Village Church again. Bob Swanson here once again with a short devotional. As I was thinking about this devotional, um, it seems to me that I can safely assume that most of us, or most of you that are watching this video, have at some point been deeply moved by the reality of God's love. Or at least you're looking for that, maybe if you haven't experienced it. There have been many times in my life where God's love has felt so true, His presence so near. It reminds me of what Wade spoke about in his sermon about the walk on the road to Emmaus by the disciples, when it says that their hearts burned with them, and that's been kind of just, I may have even mentioned that in my other devotionals, that's just been resonating for me. And I've had many of those experiences, and ironically, as Kevin Ost, our small group leader, shared on Sunday, that many of those times have occurred when I was at my wit's end and was powerless to fix whatever that crisis was that was happening. But it's also true, if I were to be frank and honest, that there have been times when God has felt distant and I have felt spiritually abandoned and alone. Not that I believed He had really done that, but that's what I felt. So singer, worship songwriter Keith Green, who was in the late 70s, 80s, and it was an influence in my life, captured those moments when you feel like that in the lyrics of his song entitled "My Eyes Are Dry." You may know that. He wrote, "My eyes are dry, my faith is old, my heart is hard, my prayers are cold, and I know how I ought to be, alive to you and dead to me." And then he asked the question, "But what can be done for an old heart like mine? Soften it up with oil and wine. The oil is you, your spirit of love. Please wash me anew with the wine of your blood." He just captured perfectly for me those moments when you don't feel like God is near. And so I'd like to share two ideas, verses that have been oil and wine to my soul during my life as a Jesus follower. The first is found in the book of Isaiah. So the context is the people of Israel are feeling forgotten, forsaken by God. And because they in turn are conquered by the Assyrians, the Babylonians, and then the Persian empires. So the author, or the poet, in verse 14 of chapter 49 of Isaiah, lodges this complaint against God. He declares that God has forsaken them, that God has forgotten them. And in response to that complaint, God speaks, and that's the verse I'd like to talk about just briefly. Verse 15 of chapter 49 says, "Can a woman forget her nursing child, or show no compassion for the child of her womb? Though she may forget, I will not forget you." This is obviously a rhetorical question, and the assumed answer is never. It's unimaginable that a woman would forget her nursing child. Yeah. One commentator even had this real practical reason, and I remember from my few short years of working on the farm, we had a milk cow we had to milk every morning and every evening, and if you didn't milk her, or you forgot or couldn't in the morning or in the evening, the next milking time, whether it was in the morning or in the evening, and she'd gone with that 24 hours, she was in pain and she was ready to be milked. And so the question implies, how can a mom just stop nursing her child? And the answer is never. It's almost impossible. But the author ups the ante as if he's hearing the complainant say, yeah, but it's still possible that she could forget. And so he goes on and allows for the extreme, unusual case in which a mom may forget her child, and says, well, even if they did forget, I will not forget you. And then to the mind of the writer or the poet, God speaks again in verse 16, as if to pile on why He won't forget. "Behold, I have inscribed your name on the palm or palms of my hands. It's easy to feel forgotten in life, especially when we're going through this type of isolation we're going through. And I know I keep going back to that, but that's the elephant in the room, isn't it? I am one of the fortunate ones in that I don't live alone. But even being isolated from you guys and from the church and friends and sometimes family creates a sense of being forgotten, of being unconnected, sometimes even to God. The other side of it is, even in a crowd, sometimes, depending on our spiritual condition, God can feel distant and his love feel cold. But when I meditate on this truth that God never forgets me, always remembers us, I again encounter the power of his everlasting love for me and you. What vivid imagery God gives us to understand his love. Imagine it. You are tattooed on the palms of his hands. Why do we write things on our hands? We do it so we don't forget, because whatever it is important to us. We want it ever in front of us. This verse reminds us that he will never leave us or forsake us, regardless of the physical and emotional state that we are going through. The second encouraging word I want to share is found in Psalm 34. If I were to summarize this psalm, it would be, when we call out to God, he hears us and answers us. And because we read that phrase several times, like, I sought the Lord and he answered me. The poor soul cried and he was heard. And then verse 18 gives the reason in Psalm 34. Because the Lord is near to the brokenhearted and saves those who are crushed in spirit. So those that are going through a hard time and feel disconnected, that's who he is close to. You know, there are many things that can get us down in life, but this verse reminds us that when we are down, when we are most vulnerable, when we are not sure we can go on, it's at that point precisely that Jesus is most near. Nothing renews me, encourages me, or inspires me more than meditating on God's everlasting love for us. It's such an extravagant love. It can burn in our hearts again and again. My prayer is that you and I will trust in and treasure these truths in our hearts. Remember these two things. God has not forgotten you, hasn't forgotten me, and he never will. Our lives are tattooed on his hands, ever under his watchful care. Nothing that you're going through is a surprise to him, nor is it something his love cannot see us through. Number two, when we are most crushed by the problems of life, or even maybe the weight of our sin, that is when he is most near and promises to hear and answer our call. Remember, you cannot call on the Lord and not be heard. That's his promise. My prayer is that we would listen. I pray that when our eyes are dry, our hearts are cold, we are brokenhearted, or maybe on the mountaintop of our spiritual journey, may your heart and my heart always be softened by his everlasting love today and always. Amen.